Hello, everybody, and welcome to VolleyTalk. Can you believe it? It is already Tuesday again and 3 o'clock Mountain Time, which means it's time for another VolleyTalk. This week, we are going to be answering questions about the armband and how to do some drills to go with it. Last couple weeks, we talked about the hip harness and then the torso harness and all the questions that went with that. So this week we are going into the arm and shoulder training and the different exercises that you do with the bands to do that. I'm Darian, one of your regular co-hosts, and then Billy, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Hey, Bill Wilson, founder, Powercore 360, exercise physiologist, strength coach, and here we go.
Yeah, here we go. So we're just going to dive right in today. If you have any sort of questions related to volleyball, feel free to ask them at any time, and we will stop the conversation, kind of shift the questions, and then shift into your question, and then go back into the topic of the day. But if you do have some specific ones related to Powercore 360 gear or the Powercore 360 arm and shoulder trainer, feel free to ask those as well. But Billy, if you want to start out today, what is the arm and shoulder trainer? What are we talking about here?
Well, I think let's frame this up based on the last couple of weeks. Ultimately, we want to teach athletes to hit the ball harder and protect their shoulder and the back in the process. The last couple of weeks, including today, we've been taking everybody kind of through a tour of Powercore 360 equipment, right? The hip trainer, the torso trainer. Today is the arm and shoulder trainer. Ultimately, we want arm speed. Really, what we want is ball speed. But to get the ball speed to come up to hit harder, the arm speed's got to come up. There are good ways of doing that and bad ways. The good ways are you teach the whole body, use the hip trainer, the torso trainer, the arm and shoulder trainer. It works the whole body to hit harder with a lot less isolated stress on the shoulder, the back, and other body parts. So the arm and shoulder trainer, digging into that a little deeper, is today we're going to focus on the arm and shoulder. And everybody else, if you didn't understand before we started into this, why do you need a hip trainer? Why do you need a torso trainer? We want the whole body and all the power from the hips, the pelvis, and core to go with the arm and shoulder muscles, right? Because that's the best way to of shoulder injuries. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So if you want to give a little bit of background here before we get into, I know you just kind of talked about what we talked about previously, but we said we want to use the whole body to hit. So give a brief, really brief about what the hip and the torso does versus what the arm trainer does.
Yeah, the hip harness, once again, teaches the muscles around the hips to turn the hips fast. That creates a lot of power from the hip and core muscles. The torso trainer goes around the rib cage. It uses the back muscles, the core muscles, as well as the hip. Now the arm and shoulder trainer, those cuffs, we're going to see some videos here in a second. It gives resistance bands, and we're going to use arm cuffs above the wrist, above the elbow, and actually on the torso trainer at the same time. It's going to strengthen the muscles around the arm, the shoulder, the rotator cuff. Everybody's heard of that. Those are muscles that stabilize and keep your arm in place when you swing. So we want arm speed. So we're going to train the movements of the shoulder and the arm to teach the exact movements we want the arm to work in to hit harder and tolerate hitting harder without pain and injury risk, right? And then so we're not only going to teach that movement with the resistance bands and the cuffs, we're also then going to strengthen the muscles, right, that allow us to hit hard and take the stress off the shoulder in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, if you have any questions about the difference of those, feel free to ask once again if you missed that or you're still kind of confused what the difference is. I'm going to put a video up on the screen here and we can kind of start walking through what we're talking about when we're talking about arm motion. All right. Billy, do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. So this is one of our athletes, a really stud athlete who's now just about to turn 16. This is her when she was 13 a couple years ago. And this is her in the arm and shoulder trainer. She's got a torso harness on. You can kind of see the band there to her right underarm. But then you'll see above her right elbow, you see kind of a black cuff. That's an arm cuff, right? And it's hooked above her elbow. And then there's a resistance band hooked on that. So basically, we're giving her the feel for the proper motion of how to open the chest and shoulders to the right sideline. She's a right-handed hitter. She's an outside. So we're working on the muscles to strengthen with the torso harness, the turn of the shoulders. I'm taking my hand, I'm teaching her how to take her right shoulder blade and actually start the rotation of her chest and shoulders to the right sideline with her shoulder blade. And then the resistance band on her elbow cuff is resisting her elbow turn or her shoulder turn and torso turn coming back. It's actually activating, turning on, engaging, and strengthening the muscles around the rotator cuff, around the chest and shoulders. Those are hitting muscles. So this exercise we call a seated pull, and this is one of the entry-level exercises. 10 reps, nice and slow, and once again, it's going to get that chest open to the right sideline, at the same time really start strengthening the muscles, hitting muscles around the chest and shoulders that are responsible to pull the arm back.
So,
All right,
Billy,
go ahead.
one question. When you talk about opening your chest to the right sideline, what does,
Yep.
for anybody that kind of doesn't really know why that's important or anything like that, could you maybe explain that a little bit more?
Sure. In the air, I mean, essentially, we are strengthening and we're teaching strengthening and allowing the athlete to feel the whole body motions of the chest, shoulder, and arm right now. Exactly the mechanics, world-class power hitting mechanics we want to teach, right? So with the band and on the torso and on the elbow cuff there, we're actually teaching her the proper power hitting mechanics. We want her to hit harder and protect her shoulder. So, to your question, with all that being said, as she turns her chest and shoulders to the right, the band on her torso harness and her right elbow are resisting that movement. For her to actually turn her chest to the right sideline, which is what we want her to do in the air as a right-handed hitter. When she jumps in the air, we teach them to turn their chest all the way to the right sideline. That stretches the abdominal muscles. And in this case, with the elbow cup on, it is stretching the muscles on the front of the shoulder, the deltoids, the pec major, right? Big muscles, the internal rotators, right? All those muscles on the front side are actually getting stretched, right? And getting loaded as that arm and chest and shoulders are going back. So actually, man, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. We're working on core muscles, we're working on chest and shoulder, we're working on arm muscles, stabilizers on the shoulder. And that's the benefit of doing highly specific movements with the proper equipment.
Yeah, can you explain one thing here? So we see the band coming from the front side of her here.
Yep.
A lot of the times we'll see the band come from the other side, right? So can you explain
Correct.
why it's set
Yeah.
up like this?
Yeah, so we'll do traditionally two different exercises. This one we've called the seated pull exercise. Later on, we'll talk about a seated push. She's rotating her chest once again to the right, towards the right sideline. She is then turning to the right and working on the muscles right where I'm putting my hand between her shoulder blades or by her right shoulder blade. The muscles on the back side below the shoulder blade that pull the shoulder blade back and down, that pull the arm back, right? To help the rotation to the right. All those muscles are having to turn on to overcome the resistance that the bands are providing, right? Once again, as she goes back, it's resisting that movement. So as she does this movement, we're reinforcing the proper mechanics. Sorry, Darren, I lost you guys. I lost the connection for just a second. Did you get all that?
No, we left off at proper mechanic.
All right, so the band in front of the body, to answer your question, as she rotates to the right, pulls the arm down, it is reinforcing, teaching her the correct movements we want her to learn, building that muscle memory, and strengthening the muscles underneath the shoulder blade, in the back, on the back side of the shoulder, as she rotates to her right. So developing strength and ingraining that muscle memory, the right movement pattern we want her to learn to use. At the same time, those muscles are extremely weak on young hitters, boys or girls, right? In this case, Emery was 13 at the time, right? In this case, she was 13. Now, this is after her doing these exercises. I'll tell you this, 7, 8 weeks. She might have been 2 or 3 months into this. So she's super strong right now as a 13-year-old doing this. But if you take the average 13-year-old hitter, they're going to struggle with just the band on the torso harness, let alone now we take her and we put a band on the elbow and put a band on the torso. So it's strengthening those muscles to open her chest up now. And as she takes her arm forward, most injuries, listen to this, this is important. Most injuries to the arm and shoulder do not happen right as the arm is going backwards. They happen as the arm is going forwards and slowing down, what we call decelerating, slowing down. The band pulls the arm out in front of the body, and she has to work on the muscles that she's using to slow the arm down, which are actually behind the shoulder, connected to the shoulder blade, connected to the spine, right? So once again, we're working on ultimately hit the ball harder, but we're also working on working the muscles that control stabilization, control the deceleration of the arm. That's going to prevent soreness. It's going to, or at least reduce the risk for soreness and reduce the risk for injury. So there's a lot going on here. It's a simple actual movement where she works on turning her chest and moving her arm, but she's getting a ton of benefits to feel the right motion and to strengthen the correct muscles at the same time on the back side of her arm, chest, and shoulders.
Absolutely. So one thing I think I want to point out here for everybody listening is this position she is in right now. What is this position during the hitting sequence? You know what I mean? Like if we were in the air right now, what is this in the hitting sequence? Is this right when she gets in the air? What should her body look like?
Well, she would be open to the right sideline. The only difference being when we do this exercise, we have her hips bent and her knees in front of her. You'll see that ball that's in there, and it's actually she's squeezing on that ball. That locks down her ankle, knees, hips, and pelvis from turning. The shoulders turn to the right, the hips and pelvis don't. That creates what we call hip and shoulder separation. That is advanced training to create more arm speed from the turn of her shoulders using her abdominal back core muscles and other tissues there. So we're working on some advanced strength training, very specific strength training. But in the air, we'd be saying, like a lot of volleyball coaches will tell their athletes as a right-handed hitter, hey, open in the air, open more. And what they're saying specifically is turn your chest to the right sideline. Well, we're strengthening those muscles responsible for turning the chest, opening to the right sideline. And we're working on the flexibility, the strength of the muscles around the spine, the shoulder blades, so she can create more power, not just from her arm, but once again from her spine, from her core, from her hips, her pelvis, the whole body.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said hip and shoulder separation. Can you just note on why that isn't so important for young volleyball players to understand?
Yeah, and I, as you guys know, if you've watched any of these, I've spent a lot of time with baseball players, pro players, college players, pitchers specifically, right? And there's a guy by the name of Tom House. Tom House was a major league pitcher. He's a baseball expert right now for pitchers. He works with a lot of major league pitchers. We had him out 20 years ago in Denver. I brought him out to Denver to do a seminar with us, right, for baseball arm speed. About it. He will tell you baseball pitching at least 80, I think he says 84%. I don't know where he got his data from, but he says like 84% of the arm speed for a major league pitcher comes from hip and shoulder separation. It comes from your core muscles, not your arm and shoulders. It comes from your core muscles. So what I've done is obviously we've worked with baseball, we've worked with golf, we've worked with all these rotational athletes. We've taken that knowledge and expertise into volleyball here and said, okay, let's also work on hip and shoulder separation. So we have to strengthen the muscles around the spine. They're called multifidus muscles. They're rotators, deep stabilizers, really important. And all the other muscles around the core that actually rotate and control the rotation of the chest and shoulders. Young athletes, when they come to us, they don't have any hip and shoulder separation. They don't know how to turn. All they know how to do is swing their arm over their head, right? So when we start training them with the equipment, we are building their ability to turn their chest and shoulders to the right, to create that hip and shoulder separation without the hip and pelvis turning with it. It's really good training. It's very advanced, and you're not going to really do it very effectively any other way without using harnesses and bands and working on rotation while your hips and shoulders are separating. The shoulders are turning without the turn of the hips, if that makes sense. Really important. Really advanced. Great power that way, not just from your arm and shoulder, but from your core.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pull up another video here, but we have another question from YouTube quick, which is kind of an interesting one. I don't know if we're going to answer directly, but maybe we could talk about things this guy could focus on instead. He's saying, how high should my reach be as a 16-year-old outside hitter?
All right, cool. Are we asking about, because reach in my world could be vertical jump. When you're measuring vertical jump, you could be standing on the ground measuring your reach. I'm guessing he's talking about when he extends up into the air to hit, how high should you be able to go?
Exactly.
Here's the answer. As high as you can jump and as high as you need to hit the ball, either a down ball or a topspin ball with velocity, right? So I don't have a hard number because I don't know if the guy's 2 feet tall or 12 feet tall. I don't know if he's got a 2-inch vert or 40-inch vert. So there's not a hard number like what should be 12 inches, all right? You should be trying to get full extension so you can jump high and hit higher balls, right, across the net with velocity. That's the best answer I can give you as best as I understand the question.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to play the next video here. If you want to walk us through what is going on in this drill now.
Cool. All right.
So,
It's going to look, go ahead, Darren.
So I guess the first thing we can notice, audience, is that the bands are going the other way. I think that's obvious. So maybe, yeah, anyways.
Yeah, the body position is the same. It looks like she's doing the same exercise. In fact, the movement is the same exercise as what we called in the seated pull. This is now a seated push. What's the difference? As Darren's already brought out, the bands, the resistance bands are now connected behind her instead of in front of her body. And in just a second, she's going to start doing these same exercises, the same movements, but now the resistance isn't out in front of the body, resisting her shoulder rotation to the right, resisting her arm turning back to the right. It's actually behind her and it's resisting her shoulder turn from like right sideline to left sideline. So it's now strengthening the abdominal core and muscles on the front side of the chest and shoulders to turn from the right sideline to the left antenna, left sideline. Those are the abdominal core muscles, back muscles that we want to have and be stronger here, right? Now, you'll also notice there's something else here. You guys have no idea how hard this exercise is. This athlete at 13 has a resistance band resisting the turn of her chest and shoulders hooked to her torso harness. If you look real closely, you're also going to see, I gave you an advanced video here. She's got an elbow band on, a wristband on, and she's got a gray resistance band hook. So she's doing 3 bands on her torso, elbow, and wrist. This is super hard. I would guarantee you there's not a lot of Division I athletes that can do this exercise unless they've been training it, right? Here's a 13-year-old that was doing it after a couple of months of training. She also banged the ball really hard, right? Great world-class mechanics she developed in a couple months. A big part of it was she was doing her homework in the master class, right? 3 days a week doing these exercises, starting with 1 band, building up to 2, building up to 3 over 8 to 10 weeks, right? So anyway, to answer your question, the bands are on the back side of the body. They're now strengthening the muscles on the front side of the body. The abdominal muscles, the internal, external oblique, the chest muscles, the pec muscles, the internal rotators to turn the chest from right to left against that resistance and bring the elbow up to get that extension, get that reach up above the arm. So here we go. We're teaching her the exact movements we want her to learn to do, but against resistance. Since we're doing it against resistance and she's going slow, she's building muscle memory. You'll see her elbow and arm coming down underneath her chin. She's building that muscle memory to build the right movement pattern. And then as she comes back, that band's going to help pull her back to the right. And now as she starts to turn back to her left, elbow starts to come up. She's being resisted. The turn of her chest, movement of her elbow, movement of her forearm and wrist and hand are all being resisted. She's strengthening those muscles as she's doing the movements.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So what are, I guess, what is the different, you said very specific muscles that we are strengthening, but what is the key point to this movement, I guess, versus the first movement, and how do they work together? I know that
you have muscles on the front side and back side of the body. They both have to be trained, right? And so many times people will just work on the muscles on the front. They're doing bench press, right? And incline press, and they're doing all the push muscles without any rotation. We're rotating, so we're training the rotary muscles, the muscles that create rotation of the torso and bring the arm through, and specifically the arm motion we want her to learn to use to hit the ball. That's different from doing a bench press, right? Or any kind of 2-arm pressing motion. So she has to learn to turn and she has to learn to strengthen her arm, strengthen her swing and arm movements going through the hitting motion we want her to learn. So she's learning the muscle memory. She's getting strong at the same time. So we don't have to go in the weight room and do weight strength training exercises and then go work with our hitting coach 3 hours apart or 2 days apart. We're doing them all at the same time, right? And in fact, if you guys have been through our program, these are activation exercises, right? For Emory and a lot of our athletes, yeah, they're strength exercises, but some of these same exercises they may do for 5 or 10 minutes before they go on the court, before they go into practice, before they go into an event, because it's kicking on, activating those hitting muscles. So anyway, these are training the muscles on the front side of the body, even though the bands are on the back. The other exercise was working the muscles on the back side of the body. Both have to be trained. If you don't, you're setting up your shoulder joint, your core, your spine for injury. You're losing power. So you've got to train on both sides of the body.
For sure. And I think this kind of goes into our next comment. That creates symmetry, right? Training both ways of the band, both ways to create symmetry on your right shoulder if you're doing this as a right-handed hitter. But now what do you do about your left shoulder? Should you do the same exercise on your left? This question is, should you train both arms to maintain balance and symmetry?
Generally, yes, you should work on symmetry, whether it's rotation, whether it's internal rotation, external rotation on the right and left shoulder. Yes, we do a lot of reps and we do them very slow and controlled on the right hand, the hitting arm side, in this case for this athlete, because once again, we're trying to build muscle memory. We want her to understand and teach the nervous system to perform these precise movements. We're not going to go through all that on the non-hitting arm. We will work on internal, external shoulder rotators, probably in a more general fashion, because we're not teaching her to hit with her left arm, right? But we will work on symmetry, and shoulder turn, spine turn, whatever the case is. Yes, those should be trained, but they don't have to be this slow and this with this much intent, because we're not teaching the left arm to make these slow swinging movements.
Exactly. So that's kind of more so what we talked about, you could say, last week or the week before, whenever we were saying how you can do the hip and torso exercises on both sides. And that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah. I think here's something that we haven't really talked about, but I think it's really fitting because, and I'm going to go into off the deep end here a little bit. So pull me back if I'm not back here shortly, right? Why is there an elbow cuff on and a wrist cuff on, right? Why don't we just put a band in the hand, right? And just move the arm, right? With a straight arm, because the arm, if you want arm speed, I want you to notice right now, if you look at my arm, I'm going to move over a little bit. The arm, if my right arm is my hitting arm, there's actually three segments there. There's my upper arm, there's my forearm, and my hand. Think of those as three individual segments. If you want arm speed here, and so many young athletes come into us swinging like a straight arm, there's very little arm speed if you're swinging with a straight arm. If you take now and you train the precise movements, what we call the arm swing 1, 2, 3s, we're teaching the upper arm to perform specific movements. We're teaching the forearm to perform specific movements, and the hand and wrist to perform other movements. You will immediately generate more arm speed, right? That's what we're trying to get to. You'll reduce the stress on the shoulder, right? The rotator cuff and the shoulder joint. If you take this arm, instead of making it this long arm like swinging a long 2x4 long board, if you take this arm and make it relaxed and allow all those segments to be able to train to perform very precise, very specific movements. Those are the same precise, specific movements she's training right now, right? She's training the specific movements of hitting, training the upper arm, the forearm, the wrist and hand to do exactly what we want her to do in the air. We're doing it in the ground because now it's a slow movement, it's a strength movement, but she's now thinking through it, and that thinking process lays down muscle memory in the brain, the nervous system. That's how you develop it. The more focused, the more intent they are with their training, right? And do the strength exercise at the same time, man, they're going to get better fast, right? Just as she did. She became a world-class hitter in 3 months, and before that, she was the average 13-year-old. 3 months later, I'd put her mechanics against anybody in the world, male or female, any age.
Yeah. So it's just proof that no matter what age, you can get those world-class mechanics, but you have to train in very specific ways, and do it in a very specific sequence as well, which is kind of what is our bread and butter, is putting together that sequence for you guys and teaching it to you guys. We have a quick question here from Instagram. kind of about a different sport. I know we talked about this another week about how Powercore 360 is used in all kinds of sports, right? Any sort of rotation sport. And this one actually is talking about the reason you basically started Powercore 360, which is golf. He says, I use Powercore 360 for golf, don't have directions or use of proper movement. Do you have any sort of tips for him, Billy, quick?
Sure. On the website, you go under training on the website, and every sport that we have instructions for, including golf, is there, right? You'll have golf, baseball, lacrosse, volleyball, et cetera, softball, but golf is definitely up there. So look under training, and you should see a drop down that says instructions. Go to the instructions page, and golf will pop up there. So if you can't find it there, then reach out to us. But if you bought the golf product, you should have gotten a golf chart. The same chart is downloadable off the website.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Great. So yeah, make sure you check that out, Mikey. And then again, if you have any questions, yes, make sure to reach out to us.
And Darian, let's go back a second, because I think you were bringing up a really good point. We're talking about specific training of the arm. We're talking about how there's 3 segments of the arm. Let's illustrate, since we're a little ahead of time here, let's illustrate an example. Right? I'm a strength coach, right? So 2 weeks ago, I'm in the gym working with Emery, and she's working on some squats and some lunges and other things, right? There's a general strength program as an almost 16-year-old, right? But if I just had her go into the gym and I had her do dumbbells and laying back on like an incline bench, right? Or a flat bench, and she's pushing up, I want everybody to understand this. Every exercise you do, we're talking about sports applications here, right? Every exercise you do teaches the body and trains the body to do a movement, right? If I'm doing bench press with dumbbells and I do it 3 times a week for 2 or 3 sets, 4 sets, whatever, and I keep doing that for a couple of weeks, very quickly, right, I start building strength in the muscles to get stronger at moving dumbbells, right? Or a bar, whatever I'm using, dumbbells in this case. I get stronger because that's what the body's learning how to do. It's not learning how to rotate the spine, it's learning how to basically take the arms behind the body a little bit and then pressing forward, right? That's a very general exercise, great for strength. Probably not going to do a lot for your hitting performance, because we don't teach athletes to hit like this, right? We teach them to open, to closed, right? To open, turn to the body to the right, turn to the left. And this is a right-handed hitter. Now here comes the elbow up in very specific ways. If you want to get better at hitting, you would do hitting movements, right? If you want to get better at lifting weights, like if you want to get really good at bench press, you're going to do a lot of bench press. You're not going to go hit volleyballs to get better at a bench press, right? So let me make sure the logic is there. We're not going to go do a bunch of general bench press exercises and think that it's going to have a major impact on a hitter, right? Nothing wrong with doing bench press, but if you think it's going to make major changes in your hitting velocity, your hitting mechanics, you're wasting time doing a general exercise, and what you need is a specific exercise. You want to get better at jumping, jump. You want to get better at hit, hit. Or train the hitting movements with resistance, which is what we do with the harnesses and bands, go through the hitting motion. Now we know, we're not guessing what muscles we're training. Will these apply to the hitting motion? Are you doing the hitting motion? Yes, then it's going to help you hit better if you perform those movements safely against an appropriate level of resistance. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with all of that you just said, Billy. You know, I think that's a very common misconception that we get, and something that we've talked about quite a lot on here is the difference between general weight training and specific volleyball training. So I think that's something that's really important that we're trying to preach to our audience here, and hopefully you guys are understanding our point of view on that. We have one quick question I want to steer towards from Instagram. It says, how do you make your knee bend backward to get maximum jump and stay? My legs always stay straight while jumping in the air, resulting in low stay in air.
Yeah, so when you jump, if you've seen any of our videos, Emery or anybody else that we've seen, that we've shown, you see athletes getting into that reverse power C, volleyball hitters, right? World-class hitters getting into reverse power C, and their knees and their feet are kind of bent up behind the body. And I think that's what this person's referring to. When you're a young athlete, male or female, when you're first learning how to jump, basically like you're learning how to jump and hit, the legs will straighten up. And that's the body's way of stabilizing, because that athlete is turning their chest and shoulders and taking their right arm towards the right sideline. They have to have stability in the air because their feet aren't on the ground. The legs stiffen, the legs straighten to give the upper body something to turn against and pull it back to stabilize it, if that makes any sense, right? And that's what happens when you're first a younger athlete, a younger hitter going through this, right? That's why we teach our athletes, don't worry about trying to get into a reverse power C in the master class in week one. It's like graduate school level, right? Work on the rotation, build a hip and shoulder separation. And what will start happening as an athlete goes in the air and starts turning their chest to the right sideline, creating that separation, and then the belly button for a right-handed hitter, this gets really technical, sorry. The belly button stays on the right antenna, the chest and shoulders turn to the right sideline. And as they start to jump and get used to doing that, you'll start to see the athlete's feet and legs starting to come up behind them naturally, because the body's learning how to control, and it's getting now stability through the hip, the core, instead of stability through the legs straightening, if that makes any sense. So for this question is, I'm not worried about, I'm not training that first. I'm working on rotation first. I'm working on hip and shoulder separation. Now, specifically, once you get ready and you've created hip and shoulder separation, the next thing is pick your feet up behind you. Do some jumps, do some approaches where you're not hitting, and focus on bringing the heels up behind the body. The thighs need to be vertical. I'm going to give you a visual of this. Sorry, best I can do. The thighs need to be vertical. So if you can see my thighs, I'm going to tip my iPad down here a little bit. The thighs need to be vertical, not bent in front. So here's one of the issues. If you are out there and you're trying to do vertical jump and you're trying to get your feet up behind you, get in that reverse power seat position, and you are doing a bunch of box jumps where you're jumping up on a box and your hips and knees are bending in front of you, you're teaching yourself to land with your thighs, hips, and knees in the wrong position. And now you're going to have to untrain that. You really can't untrain it. You just have to do a bunch of training with your knees straight, thighs straight, and feet up behind you. You got to train it. So for us, the easy answer, and maybe we should do a session on the reverse power C and jumping and showing this athlete in this case needs to work on keeping the thighs straight, not doing box jumps, and lifting the heels up behind the body, kind of like what we call a butt kicker as a warm-up or a track and field exercise, right? Bringing the heels up behind the body with the thighs straight. Try doing that. Try jumping, keeping the thighs straight, knees directly underneath the hips, and try to bring the heels up behind the body. Start working with one leg first, then work on two legs. And then when you start getting it, then you can go in the air and either hit off a hook, right? And that'd be the easiest way to do it, hit it off a hook, or someone's trying to toss you and the ball's moving and you're trying to focus on pulling your heels up, man, there's so much going on in your brain. It's really hard to narrow that down into I'm trying to get my heels up behind me. Does that make any sense? Keep it simple. You've got to train it, but once again, box jumps, a lot of people love them. It's the trend right now. For a volleyball athlete, for a blocker or a hitter, it's not putting the legs and hips in the position we want to train. It's just making those movements much harder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely answers the question. Our next question that we have here is, we have a couple. One is about serving. This one's pretty straightforward. I'm trying to find a video that helps with serving mechanics or the specific mechanics of serving. Any advice? I would say the serving mechanics are generally the same as our hitting mechanics, right? Besides for the fact that your hand will be a little bit different if you're trying to float serve. But if you're trying to topspin serve, the mechanics of turning your hips, opening and closing will be the same. So really any video you can find on our YouTube channel will help you out with that.
Yeah, same mechanics. You're right. Mm-hmm. Same mechanics, unless it's a floater. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Our next question here is, do you offer a program modified for middles? My daughter went through most of your program and was moved to middle. There just isn't enough time to do all the mechanics in the middle that is taught here. And then he also went on to say it's super great stuff. She just needs to understand how to modify what she has learned.
Yeah. So a few months ago, I don't remember, it was some of the early VolleyTalks we were doing. And by the way, they are on YouTube, right? So they should be able to go find those previous episodes. We did a couple of episodes talking about Ella. Ella is a 15-year-old athlete here locally that I train, 6'2", 6'4", whatever she is. And we showed her, she's been through the master class, but we showed what we were doing with her earlier this spring and earlier this summer as a middle. And so we spend a lot of time working on the torso harness, not as much time in the hip harness. We work the arm and shoulder trainer in addition to the torso harness. And we just say to her, when we started off, we want you to get your chest open to the right sideline and then close it, right? For the same reason, you might not, especially as a younger hitter, you may not have enough vertical jump. You may not have enough time in the air to do the hip, the shoulder, and the arm, right? So get them to focus on, get them to work on in the torso harness, doing the seated pull, seated push with the arm bands working with it. Use that as activation. And then the focus is when you get on the court, if you went through one of our clinics and using a hook, get them to open their chest to the right sideline and just hit the ball, right? Just like we do in the clinics, open to the right sideline, swing straight through the ball. We're not worried about the hips, even though with Ella, we do some training in the hips, but we do some training in the hip harness with her because I keep telling her, yeah, you play in the middle now, but I think she's going to be a Division I outside hitter. And so I'm giving her all the skill set and movements that she can go play anywhere on the court. Left side, middle, right side, back row, jump serve, back row, out of system hit. So, I hope that answers the person's question. Work on the torso turn, sync up the arm with it. They'll have enough time to do that, and their ball speed will rocket. Ella's arm speed went up in about 6 weeks. These are balls in the air. When she started, she was about 36 miles an hour. That was maybe April, May. Sometime in early June, she was hitting balls 46 miles an hour in the air as a middle as a 15-year-old, right? So pretty good.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And if you can't find that video, just message us and I can forward that link to you. So you can see that there's lots of great information there about what we want our middles to do. So that's a great video for reference. We have another question here from Instagram. It's, when it comes to spiking, what are the 2 areas you find the average youth athletes suffer from power leakage or missing out on power output, if you prefer?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And this is someone that understands, that's worked with athletes. And, this is making an assumption they have power to begin with, and there's a leak here or there. It's like you got a garden hose and you got a leak in it, and some of the power is squirting out. The majority of young volleyball athletes we see that come to us 12, 13, 14 years of age, but it can just as well be 17s and 18s. They don't have any power. I mean, the power they're getting is not a leak. It's all arm and shoulder, and that's why their arm, shoulder, and back hurts. It's putting a lot of undue stress on those areas. So for us, it's not so much, I would say, it's a leak. They need to learn how to generate power, right? And get their body to turn to get more power, more rotational power, more torque from their hips, their core, their shoulders to add to the arm. So it's not so much a leak. It's just they need to be trained to rotate, to open and to close, and use their arm and their body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, figuring out how to use their arm and their body together is basically, if you can figure that out from a very young age, that's going to help them a lot in the future. Great. Well, if you guys have any more questions, let us know. You can always comment or message us as well if you do have any questions, and we will be sure to answer those. And also, we could, like we said, I know, Billy, you said there was some topics on here and questions on here that we could probably do a full episode about, and we got some, yes, please do a full episode about that. So that's something we will have to note for the future. If that's some topics that you guys are wanting us to talk about, we can definitely do that. But yeah, like I said in the beginning, we are here every single Tuesday at 3:00 Mountain Time. Next week is going to be a really exciting episode. We are going to be talking to former Division I coach, Aaron Shepherdson, who is a part of our Powercore 360 team here. He was a Division I coach for 17 years, and his wife still is a Division I coach. And with volleyball season right around the corner, we wanted to do an episode all about recruiting and how that whole process works for young athletes, to get some of that information out there for anybody that has those kinds of questions. So make sure you tune in next week at 3:00 if you want to catch that. And then we have some other really fun topics coming up in the next few weeks after that as well. But like I said, if you guys have any other topics that you want us to talk about, we can definitely do that. But Billy, thank you today for all the questions being answered and for explaining all the stuff with the arm motion and the shoulder movements and how to use the gear in that way.
You bet. You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Oh, one more thing, everybody. This is super important. If you've seen some of our posts lately, if you want to do the volleyball power hitting masterclass, we are running a special for our social media followers where you can get 10% off the masterclass by using code SOCIALS when you check out for the masterclass. So if that is something that you've been interested in and you've waited to pull the trigger on buying that, this is a good opportunity to get a little discount to go with it just for following us on social media. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to message us as well, or you can just click the link in our bio and it's under Power Hitting Masterclass. And like I said, code SOCIALS for a discount there. But all right.